everyone. This is Will Sober from Grumpy Combat Veteran Media. We are really excited to give you this show. It's a tearjerker. As always, I probably cry about 4 or 5 times, but I'm leaning into it. So you know what? That's what I do. It was just a beautiful conversation. It's long. We try to keep things under an hour, but this one was so good that we just decided, it's going to be an hour and a half. It's a beautiful story. It's a story of loss. It's a story of grief. And it's a story of a resilient woman who found meaning in her son's death. And I don't know, it takes my breath away. It inspires me to hear her determination. And I hope it does the same for you. So without further ado, shoulder to shoulder.
You've been home for a couple of years now, buddy, but you're still fighting the war.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shoulder, Untold Stories from a Forgotten War. This is episode 5, and I'm your co-host, Will Selber, along with the beautiful, the talented, the fierce,
Thank you.
Kate K. Kate,
Thank you so much.
how are you doing today?
Honestly,
Yes.
That made me feel beautiful and fierce, so I am ready for this podcast
Boom.
episode. And it is a good one. I'm really excited to talk about it.
We are very excited as well. We try to tell conversations. We have conversations to bridge the Civ Mill gap, and I think, that's what we try to do here. And I think when we talk about war, we have a propensity to talk about it in some abstract level, right? Like people start banding it about like it's a algebra problem, and they miss the human dimension of it. So I'm honored today to bring on a Gold Star mom. Holly Higgins-Staudacher is a Gold Star mom and a Gold Star ambassador with the Hero's Journey. As a storytelling coach, she works with a Lieutenant Colonel retired Scott Mann. She's going to be here to talk to us about her journey as a Gold Star mom. And just to give a little bit of background, on October 5th, 2010, her son, Senior Airman Daniel Johnson, was killed in action in Afghanistan. He was an EOD tech and explosive ordnance disposal, like a bomb squad. He was in the United States Air Force. For those that don't know, I've spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I've deployed with EOD techs, and they are the bravest people on the battlefield. They are the bravest people on the battlefield, and it is an honor to have you on, ma'am, and to talk to you. And to talk about your journey and your son and grief and storytelling. Welcome so much to Shoulder to Shoulder.
Thank you for inviting me, Will and Kate. I'm humbled to be here. I look to you guys. I know a little bit about you. I've been following you and reading your articles for about a year almost now. And when you contacted me, I was honored and thrilled and I'm really humbled. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ma'am. Why don't you? I know that you are traveling as I am right now. I'm in a beautiful Holiday Inn. We're off the highway in Louisville, Texas. But you're in a little bit of a nicer locale. Why don't you tell us a little about where you're at right now, ma'am?
I am staying at a condo on the Emerald Coast near Destin, and the reason I'm staying near Destin is because of Eglin Air Force Base, where I will be spending several days this week at Eglin. They host, first of all, Eglin is where the Naval School Explosive Ordnance Disposal is, and so my son was there for, I want to say, about 9 months training for EOD school, and so my first visit there was right before he graduated, and then for the graduation, and so whenever he that was in 2009.
Okay.
No. Wait, 2007. Sorry.
Okay.
It's been a while. All these.
I
years.
understand. I get all my deployments mixed up by date all the time. They just kind of blur together into this haze.
Yeah. Well, and I've got two boys that served, so their date I mix up their dates on years. The longer the older I get. But so he graduated from EOD in September of 2007, and
Mm.
that was an amazing weekend here. Um, I just to
Mm.
brag on him a little bit,
Please.
through his 9 months of training, he would write constantly. And
Wow.
I think, and he called us and would be,
Mm.
oh, this is so hard. I don't think I'm going to do it. I'm not going to pass. I'm not going to, pray for me. Which, my boys, I know they're not like normally asking to be prayed for. So
Yeah.
I
I knew,
know that's tough.
not that he wasn't faithful, but it was, I knew it was tough. I knew he was struggling. And, but anyway, he flew through this first time through with honors, graduated with
Wow.
honors. And when we visited before the graduation, he introduced me to many people. And there were quite a few that had been, and I think I'm using this term correctly later, they'd say that they were washed back, like
Yes.
they were on their,
You
you
washed
know,
out, and they had to start all over again.
right, right. And he had such a heart for them. He felt so, he was so humble, and he was
It's
always
a
like,
look. That's not an easy school.
I know. I mean,
I mean, that is just not an easy school. The washout rate is pretty high. It
yeah,
is when we talk a lot about service, and I just kind of put a highlight on this. Like when you volunteer to serve, it's amazing. But when you volunteer to do something like an EOD tech, that is I step back. I'm in awe of that because I've seen what those men and women do on the battlefield, and I have been in MRAPs before and in Humvees before in Baghdad and in Afghanistan, and I have seen them do that lonely walk. And while I was inside the MRAP, they get out and they go out there on their own. It is the most humbling thing I've ever seen in my life. It takes your breath away. It just really does.
It speaks a lot to your character when that's what you choose for your specialty, right? Like that's a person who's like obviously really brave, but also I think it speaks to their integrity that they're willing to put themselves on the line for something that they think is bigger.
and it was so important.
I admire your son a lot.
Yes.
The things that he would say, his big thing before deployments was always, he knew I was worried, of course, and concerned about his
Sure.
safety. And interestingly, I'll say, I wasn't thinking about physical, which I suppose because moms don't, you don't want to go there thinking that your child will be injured physically. Not that, but and my father was, by the way, a combat veteran, and so
Mm.
he suffered dearly.
Where did he serve, ma'am?
He served in World War II.
Wow. A
And
military family for sure.
yeah, yeah, and he was Coast Guard, South Pacific, Higgins
Wow.
boats, which was cool because his last name was Higgins. So
Meant to be.
it was right, but he really, that war never left him ever.
Yeah.
And he suffered terribly, and so my family suffered. Growing up, I was the least affected because I was a surprise baby late, well after that war had ended.
Mm.
But the war was in my home and my
Right.
family, and so that was my big concern, was that that something would happen to his spirit and his soul that would devastate him. And so my big fear, and this was my naivety, I think maybe,
Yeah.
that, that defending himself would mean someone else is going to get hurt, and that would hurt him.
Yes.
And he knew all of that. And so he would always, the last thing he'd say to me after we'd hug goodbye was, Mom, what I'm going to save lives.
Amen.
And that's good for the soul, was his comments back to me. And so he was a very special kid that would choose that. And he was young. He was so young. I mean, he had finished 1 year of college and decided to do this. So
what was that comment? If you don't mind, ma'am, like why? Like when he told you that this was what he was going to do. I mean, it must have. I mean, did he have to explain the whole thing to you, like what an EOD tech does and what they do, and like, I mean, that's just How was that conversation?
Um, it was in a way, it's kind of funny
Yeah,
because yeah, EOD. I'm like, first of all, he, when he told me he was going to, take a few years from college and
sure.
enlist,
Yep.
Air Force, and at first
Yeah,
no
sure.
infantry, Mom, don't worry. And his brothers,
That's what
I'm
my
very,
mama said too.
and I don't want to offend you with this, Will, but one
No,
of my
ma'am, you
other,
won't.
well, I have four sons, and one of
Yeah.
them is Will, by the way, my
Okay.
Will, and he was the most merciless on Danny, saying, "Oh yeah, you're going in the cheer force."
Yep. 100%.
And I was like, "Yep, cheer force is good with me, honey." And he's like, "Yeah, it's all technology, Mom. Everything's cool." And then he says EOD, which meant nothing to me, you know.
Right.
And he kind of acted a little like he let it be for a while. Mom doesn't really get it, and that's okay. And then he felt guilty knowing that I had no clue. So yes, he told me E stands for explosives, ordnance disposal. And
Hmm.
it took me, and there was like this moment of, that my brain going, "Oh, that sounds like bomb squad to me."
Yes.
And he's like, "Yeah, that's what it is, Mom. It's really cool."
It's hard
Wonderful.
to imagine, though, how he had to navigate that conversation, right? Because you want your family to be prepared, and he's so excited about what he's doing, so he had to navigate that really carefully. And I see that with a lot of kids and their parents, which is the roles really shift, and suddenly it's the kid feeling like they have to take care of their parents
Yeah.
by explaining something in a
Yes.
really gentle way and not putting that fear in you.
Oh yeah. Oh,
So,
he talked a lot about the robots and
yeah,
all
yeah,
the equipment.
Yeah.
And he'll be
comfort.
in a big truck, and he
Yep.
showed me I went and saw their big, the EOD trucks and da da. But then of course I also saw and had to and got to actually try on the bomb suit and the helmet. That freaked me out, and I remember at the time, one of the guys there telling me what those helmets weigh and cost, and put the helmet on, and I had this helmet on, and my other grown up, they were all adults almost, almost, because late teen,
Hmm.
and Dan at that time was like, I don't know, 21 or whatever when he finished DOD. So they were pounding on that helmet, and I couldn't hear or feel a thing. And then they told me how expensive it was. And at that time, I was, I was like, whoa, when people complain about what this war costs, if it was their child that needed one of those helmets, they might not complain so much about the cost. I said, spend all you want to make those helmets for like this, where you can't.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So it was a process of me, going through playing with the robots, going in the
Hmm.
truck, and then saying, let me check out that suit, and how much those weigh and the heat. And
Oof.
I got to tell you, Danny was, I know I'm going kind of all over the place here,
No,
You're
please.
but
fine, please.
one of the fun things about him, well, all my boys, and I too, but not anymore. I'm a little too old now. But we were all rock climbers, and
Okay.
it goes back for me to the '70s when that was kind of a newer, trendy thing.
Hmm.
And so the boys all did it too. The girls not so much, but anyway, they're all like super into rock climbing. Danny so much so that that's what he did for his bachelor party, was he took all the guys climbing out in California, mountain climbing. So that was they were like, some of them were
Hey,
like, dude,
No,
this
that's
is
so
not.
I mean, you got
sincere.
to
Oh,
have
I
an
love
adventurous spirit.
that.
Yeah,
A man or woman who volunteers to be an EOD tech, they have an adventurous spirit.
oh yeah,
They are comfortable with walking up to that line,
yeah.
and
He was
you,
pretty crazy.
yeah,
He
right, of course. I mean,
even
look,
like with water skiing had to be barefoot skiing. Yeah, yeah. Everything was to the extreme. And the reason I
I
even
get it.
mentioned the reason I even mentioned the climbing was because when he was in Iraq, he was bored because it was 2009. That was 2009, and he was
Was
in
that his first
Baghdad.
deployment, ma'am?
That was his first deployment, and
He was in Baghdad in 2009. Is that right, ma'am? So
right,
at the trail end of the surge, basically
yeah.
the surge. And was he? Do you remember where he was at by any chance? It's okay if you don't. What
Well,
base?
bag. Oh, you know what? I have it somewhere, that information.
Yeah, it's
But
okay.
it's been
Probably,
a
yeah.
while.
Okay, cool.
But I have, and I've got a lot of videos and pictures that the guys that were with him have sent me, which is
Yeah.
super fun to see.
Oh,
But he would call me and email and say, yeah, it's really quiet, it's really boring. So he built a climbing wall, an indoor climbing wall to stay in shape, and he climbed in his bomb suit over and over. We've got all these pictures where he's like this in the suit, after I, and I'd had those on, or one of those on, I know
Yeah.
they're like 80 to 100 pounds of extra weight, and they can be up to 100 degrees inside with all the armor and the software, and then the outside time. Oh, it's just amazing. It
Ma'am,
was
I would just,
crazy.
ma'am, I want to commend your son right there in that story
yeah.
because I have, as a man who deployed a few times, I have had to deal with some troops that when they get bored and then maybe the mission's not too high ops, boredom is the devil's playpen, and like
Yes.
you haven't lived until you like walk outside of a bee hut and you see one of your soldiers on a slalom skiing, like being pulled in the sand by a Humvee, and I'm like, what are you doing out
They're
there
living their
today?
life.
Yeah, and
You know,
but like your
living their
son,
life.
used that time to get better
He
and
did.
to prepare because that's training right there.
Oh, yeah.
That's training.
He was
That is
so
training
focused.
because he wanted to succeed because he knew the level was in his hands. You have to take that skill set seriously. Seriously.
I think
Seriously.
people don't realize though how much boredom is associated with deployments, right?
Yeah.
It's either you are having like an extreme experience, like
Oh,
if you
yeah.
are right on the bomb squad, or there's nothing for you to do and there's nowhere for you to go and you have to come up with this.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things I hear from veterans a lot. They're like, people don't realize like how much of that time you are just sitting there with yourself.
Mhm.
And so I love that your son found something that was personal to him and made him feel active and like he was getting to do something. Like that's good use of his time. He was
Mhm.
resourceful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, he actually would talk about that to me, what you just said, that there's this time, it's either one extreme or the other. And he knew from when I was a registered nurse when he was little, and we lived up in northern Minnesota, way on the edge, right up 2 hours north of Duluth, Minnesota, so on the border. And we had a 30-bed hospital. And our ICU was post-op, it was everything. And there were
Yeah.
like 10 beds in there. And that's where I would have to work, because I would work overnights because I had these little kids, and weekends. And it was like, and he knew I would come home and say, yep, it was, I had to keep myself awake because it was either going to be like this or code. It was one thing, or
Yes.
the only thing they needed me for was code. So I
Yep.
felt like I related to his sense of what am I going to do to stay ready for the code? We
Yeah.
talked about that, but so I could relate somewhat, even though it was a totally, obviously not combat, and I have no.
It's similar enough though.
Yeah. So he did 6 months in Iraq. Is that right?
Yes.
A 6 months deployment. And that took him to like the 2009. He came back. How was that for him? If you don't mind me asking. You come home from your first deployment, and maybe even if it wasn't high ops tempo, I don't know what he was doing. It was probably he was. He had some moments.
He did.
But like, yeah, of course he did, right? You're still deployed in Iraq, and when you come home from your first deployment, I came home from mine in 2006, doing training the Iraqi police, quotes around that, during the Sunni Shia civil war. And like, I tell you, it was tough because that's my thing, man, is always to say, for me, coming home was the hardest part because now you have to come home and you have to try to figure out what just happened to you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's such a common theme. Well,
Yeah.
I see that a lot with the veterans that I work with, which is one of the most basic methods of survival is that you don't think about what your experience is and what your surroundings are, right?
Yep.
So you're not thinking about the danger and you're not thinking about the boredom or what you're doing. And then you come home and the 6 months of trauma, because it is traumatic, no matter what your deployment is like there are hard parts of it. That's when it starts to hit.
Yeah.
So you're not only no longer in the familiar surroundings that you've been trained to be in, but suddenly you're also having to process things in a way that you don't necessarily know how. I think that's one of the hardest parts of coming home from a deployment.
Yeah.
And
So, go ahead, ma'am.
I was just going to say, I feel that triggers some emotion for me. My throat is cold.
That's okay.
I remember, that time my boys, all of them, and probably Danny the most, even though he was the third one out of four, so he was on the younger end. But I'm going to say he was the most protective of me. There was a period of time when I was single with them. And how so we moved from northern Minnesota down to Wisconsin I went to grad school at UW in Madison, and I had these four sons, and Danny was 10. So he was like, young. The other two were just starting to get into all that peer stuff, middle school and going and thinking about high school and hanging out with their friends. The youngest was still a little guy, he was like 7, which is little. And, whereas the 10-year-old, he felt pretty like he was kind of grown up now, and he sat, shotgun, and he was my navigator, learning the state of Wisconsin, driving all over. He helped me pick out everything to, make the new home. He just, so he became this very close, and he was very protective. I worked besides being an RN, then I went into social work, and I worked for more than a dozen years as a forensic specialist with people who had been found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. So my boys would worry about me, and Danny most working with, because these were the heavy hitters. These were, this was homicide and arson and batteries to officers.
Wow.
It wasn't, I call the DWIs that I started out with when I first started working. They were the lightweights. These were the heavyweights. And so Danny became very, very protective in every sense. And so when he started, this whole, like you were talking earlier, Kate, him navigating, letting me know what EOD was all about was a very, very a lot of forethought in what he'd say and how he'd let me know. And of course, it still took me a while for it to dawn on me. And it did when I said, okay, so Air Force has no infantry. And he's like, yep. I said, but you're EOD. Yep. So you go in front of the infantry to make it safe for them, right? Am I getting this right? And he's like, well.
You figured it out. I was wondering how long it would take, but you put the dots together.
Yeah. And it was really, so I couldn't go there in my head that he could get hurt.
Yeah, sure.
And then he'd say, I'm going to save lives. And I was all, okay, this is all good, and I don't really know where we were going with all of this.
Yeah, I was, I think, go ahead, Kate. You were going to ask another question.
Yeah.
Brother.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable answering this, Holly, of course, because it is a little bit more of a invasive question, but you talk a lot about how he was so protective even when he was 10, and then how he let you know that he was going EOD. I'm wondering what your communication was like when he was actually deployed. Like, I see some frustration sometimes with family members because they desperately want to support the person who is abroad, and then the person who is actually serving wants to protect their family from fear. And so I'm wondering, what your communication with him was like during that time.
Yeah, it was kind of a lot of joking because he wanted me to know everything. It's cool. We're cool. Everything's good. Can't tell you what I'm doing. Can't tell you where I'm at. Can't and I'd always joke about that. Yeah, because me and Al Qaeda. I mean, we are. You don't want me saying something and getting it out. Stuff now.
By the way, you're absolutely right. It's absurd. But go ahead. We should be able to tell people where we are. It's not like people are going to figure it all out but go ahead, man.
I know it was, and so
you're right.
Kind of that was really a big theme. He would, so we focus on, what he's doing and the wall climbing and the pictures he'd
Yeah.
send me, and he had a new girlfriend when that he had met stationed in California, and so so we talked a lot about Kristen and their relationship, and at that point his two older brothers had gotten married, right? Oh boy, yeah, they were both married when he went to EOD, so they were, yeah, and so that was a big topic, what's going on with
Sure.
your girlfriend and where's she at,
Yeah.
and I knew that it was very serious. He fell in love quickly, and they were engaged. Well,
Mm.
one of the things that had occurred when he was, and this is why it was a big topic, while he was deployed in Iraq, she became ill and
Mm.
diagnosed with cancer and had
Oh,
some
Oh my
surgery.
goodness
gosh.
and
gracious.
and foolish mom. I mean, again, I am so, even though I grew up with a dad who served, he wasn't a career military.
Sure.
So and I'm, just a really, I don't know, dumb civilian, because I'm like,
No.
just tell him that you're engaged so you can go home and be with her. And he's
It's
like, Mom,
I
helpful.
wish that's the way it worked. They
Yeah, it's
don't do that. I
helpful.
know, man. You're like, yeah, I hear you.
but
It's an understandable reaction. Just be like, you are engaged and you need to go home.
right,
And
your
it's
girlfriend's
like,
sick.
Yep, me too.
I understand that, ma'am. My father died on my fifth deployment,
Mm,
and I didn't get to see him when he died. And these are the things that your son, he missed out on those parts of life,
right.
right? The good, the beautiful, the bad. You miss out on that while you're gone. And there is very, very rarely. I got to go home to see my daughter get born. I missed the entire
Oh,
pregnancy, but
oh,
I had to come back, right? A week after my daughter was born, I was getting back to Afghanistan. I just think that when people hear about this, when deployed members are downrange, there's nothing they can really do to come back home to help unless it is a real like Red Cross type of emergency
yeah.
to somebody in the inner circle, and even fiancés, not going to happen unless it's married. That has been
I
my
know that
understanding.
now. I have a
Yeah.
much better, but I
Yes,
was
ma'am.
still so naive and trying to tell him, you got to come home, you got to,
Right.
but he was so patient with me,
Yeah.
and he didn't go, Mom, you just don't get it. He didn't do
Yep.
anything like that. He was a really amazingly patient kid. And anyway, they ended up getting married when he got home. They were married on June 5th of 2010, and he was
Okay.
killed October 5th of 2010, 4 months
Yeah.
to the day after
Mm.
he was married. So just
So he
another,
got married in between deployments.
yes,
So
and
he
As
was his
y'all
second
do.
deployment was the one that he was killed in, ma'am.
yes,
And so I just want to kind of level set a little bit for some of our listeners, and you can tell me if I'm getting this incorrectly. But as an EOD tech, my thinking is he deployed in Iraq individually because he wasn't part of a unit. Did he deploy downrange by himself, or was he with a larger unit? Do you know that by any chance? It's okay, no worries.
I
So
just
when
know
he
he was
went
on
on his
a team of three. I
okay,
know the guys he worked with, and now I've met the rest. They were
okay,
attached to
okay,
other
got it. And then when
units.
he went to, did he do the same type of deployment when he was in Afghanistan? Do you
Yeah.
know where he was based out of, ma'am, by any chance?
Well, Kandahar,
Which Kandahar Airfield?
right, to start with, and he was deployed, or went
Yeah,
in later August of
yeah,
2010,
yeah,
and you know he would call. We have, like I've told you, we have a large family,
yeah.
7 kids, and so he would, and then his dad is still alive, so he'd have to rotate between calling all of us. So I got as many calls as we could, and our last call we got from him was 2 weeks before he was killed.
Mm,
So it was like September 24th was the last time I
mm.
heard from him. And on that call, we were in the car, my husband and I, so I had him on speakerphone. And we were doing the typical, because he says,
Sure.
I'm packing for a mission. I'm like, I know
Yep.
you can't tell me because of all my contacts now with the Taliban, because no, it was that was my,
Right.
and just joking around. And from my perspective, and after we hung up, my husband said, he's, for the first time Mike had ever said anything like this at all. We hung up from Danny, and he said, he's scared. And I just looked at him like, no way, we were just joking. He's not scared. He's been, I could, I was
Yeah.
completely oblivious, and I'm super close to my kids. So, and this was his stepdad, who he was the most like, by the way. Mike and Danny were the most alike, which it has its A and B sides, you know.
Sure.
They
For
both
sure.
understood each other in things that made it hard sometimes. So yeah, he said no, he's scared. He's really scared. I heard it, and you know, of course, now we all know what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
That while he called me and was packing for this mission, on the 21st of September, one of his friends, in a different team of 3,
Mm-hmm.
Michael Burris is his name. I'm going to be visiting with his mom this week.
Wonderful.
He was killed on the
Yeah.
21st of September, and then Danny called me on the 24th. So Michael heard
Yeah.
that he knew he was going to a very hot spot, and he was replacing a friend, and that's you know, a lot of stuff going on there.
For people,
It makes sense though that the conversation that you had with him felt normal, because that's what service members want. They want to talk about things that feel normal, because they know that what their experience is not.
Yeah, he wanted
so
to hear all about we were moving, our new house, what he was going to come home to, blah, blah, blah. Nothing to me about here he was, his heart was broken. He just lost a friend, and the other 2 were wounded grievously, or if the word is, you know, just horrible wounds.
Yeah.
He knew all that, and all he did was joke around with me and tell him about our new house, and yeah, it was really
protective.
I just want to scene set a little bit for some of the listeners who don't maybe understand what your son was doing. Kandahar in 2010 was a dangerous place. For people who don't understand, Kandahar is in southern Afghanistan. It's near it kind of touches up against Pakistan, right? And so it is the home of the Quetta Shura Taliban. It is where the Taliban began, right? The Taliban began in Kandahar and Uruzgan, up there. And so in that little circle is where the Taliban movement started. And when he was there, it was part of, you know, I'm guessing, I think I got it right. He was probably part of like the surge that came in to Afghanistan in 2010. And so I was there in 2012 in Kandahar, in Gorak, Kandahar, in Sangin, near Sangin. And it was, look, the war was there. And he was doing, I can't think of a more dangerous mission and a more dangerous time. And I just want you to know that I'm in awe of his bravery. It fills me with awe. I have, I lost this. We're recording this on, I think 30 April, is that right? Or something like that. And a couple days ago was the 16-year anniversary of Senior Airman Jonathan Yoner, who was killed in an IED. And like, when you think about these young troops, I'm just in awe of them. They're my heroes. You know, they raise their hand to serve, and then they raise their hand again because I want to do EOD. And then they're like, we're going to put you in the most dangerous place, and we're going to send you forward. And your friend died a couple of days ago, and you're going to send you right there. And he said, okay, let's go. And I just want people to realize the level of bravery that takes. It fills me with awe and honor to have served alongside men like that. I just want you to know that, man.
Thank you. It does the same to me. I just, every day, now for 13 and a half years, every morning I wake up thinking, why was I given the privilege to be a mom to someone like that. You know,
Yeah.
I have come to a place where I understand, and I can't explain it. I can't. There aren't words that will make sense of my understanding of why Danny died when he did and how he did. But you know, we were going to talk a little bit about this anyway. I think, you know, that the journey with grief,
Yes.
um, to me, has been amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
I look at grief, and that's one of my callings, I feel, in what
Ye-
I do now, is to help
Yes, ma'am.
people understand that grief is not a bad thing.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
not bad. It's a gift to help us mourn and to move past, you know, I mean, I will never not be shattered and broken
Of
over
course.
Danny's death. And
Of
I'll
course.
never be far from these tears. They're always there, like
Always. Always.
always right there.
Always.
But but what I have discovered is that there is this amazing um, gift of hope and joy restored at a
Yes.
level I didn't even know was possible until I lost something so precious. And so for my gratitude now for what remains and the gifts that I had for 23 years with Danny, you know, just the gratitude and the appreciation, um, only I believe comes when we walk with that grief and don't run and don't stuff and don't deny, but just let it wash over and teach and change and make the world new and in beautiful ways. And it all sounds crazy to talk that way
No,
when your
ma'am.
son dies, but
No, ma'am. No,
Can
ma'am.
I just want to respond to one thing you said, Holly. You said, I don't know why I was so lucky,
yeah.
to have Danny in my life. And I think you're not giving yourself enough credit,
Mm,
because I don't think he would have been the man he was
absolutely.
without you. You talk about how special your relationship was. And I think about how, in those moments leading up when he was probably so scared, he was also probably, he felt so steeled because he had what you had taught him. I
Yes.
really believe that he was who he was because of you. And so I just want to give you the credit, because I think he wasn't walking alone. I know what the phrase means, and I know how it feels, but I just, that's where I'm at. So Holly, the question that I was asking is, you've spoken really beautifully and eloquently about what grief can be in a positive tone, right? Like, we can feel these moments of joy and it can help us to support other people in the community, but I suspect it didn't feel like that in the very beginning. And so I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit about what your journey with grief has looked like.
Yeah, in the beginning, it was a very, very gray fog. I sometimes the best way to describe that first year is I felt like I was in a film noir, you know, an old black and white movie that was all about bad, sad, you know, and I mean, just to be really honest, it was horrifying. There's no the night. Yeah, I'll never ever forget the
Yeah.
night. I will never ever forget the details of that I remember. And then talk to my husband, and there's so much I don't have a clue that I was spewing and screaming and all of that. It
You're
was.
talking about the notification, the casualty notification,
Well,
ma'am?
and our circumstance was a little different. I'll be honest and say that when I hear people use the term the knock at the door, I
Yeah.
get jealous because we didn't get a knock at the door.
Uh,
We were driving home on an interstate from a long trip, a long 10-hour road trip from northern Minnesota, just visiting our newborn first granddaughter. And we were like 3 hours from home, and then we'd had the phones kind of turned off to enjoy this beautiful autumn, Indian summer day. It was gorgeous, early October 5th and it was sunny and warm, and we were just trying to shut out the world and deconnect, whatever you call it, deconnect isn't a
Yeah.
word, but
Yeah, absolutely.
and then when the sun went down, we still had a few hours. I turned my phone on and I saw there was like, 15 calls from my son, my oldest son, and I was terrified that it was about the baby. So I called him right back, and the first thing he said, now this is my oldest son, and at that time he was 27 years old. He was just a kid himself. To have the composure to say, "Mom," and I said, "Well, what's wrong with me?" I was so worried about the baby.
Yeah.
Maddie's fine, but you need to call Dad. You need to call Dad right now. And I'm like thinking, well, isn't he out there? Because he was
Yeah,
on his
sure.
way to see the baby. And I said, isn't he right there? And he goes, he's right here, but I want you to call. And very
Hello?
calmly, very
I've
maturely,
lost.
I want you to call him. And so again, I'm like so clueless about life sometimes. I'm thinking, oh, he wants to share his first moments with our first granddaughter because we have a very amicable relationship, very
Sure.
loving. So I'm thinking, oh, how sweet. That's how clueless I am. And so I hung up and I dialed to him and I knew he was right there. And he didn't say hello. I could tell he answered, but it was total silence. And I'm like saying, Jim, are you there? And then I could hear his shaking, breathing. And all he could get out was, we've lost Danny,
Yeah.
which did not, compute, it was like, okay. So, I mean, I went right into the mode of, okay, so he's missing. So we have to find him. We have to call everybody and have everybody we know pray. He's missing in action. He's in a desert. I'm picturing, he's lost.
Yeah.
And that was my, so that's how I found out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and then we had to, my husband did pull over on the interstate while and it was
Sure.
horrifying all that we went through. But so, yeah, I look at when people talk about the knock at the door and having the dress blues and the chaplain and you fall to your knees and they're there holding you. No,
Yeah.
I was running into a cornfield like a wild animal, just screaming, and my husband was just standing there not knowing because I'm saying he's lost, but obviously I knew better because I was out of my mind, and so, yeah, it was a tough initial thing. And then I went into really, like blackouts, I have total blackouts. I have no memory from that. I have like little snippets, vague memories of getting together with the kids, but I have no memory of how we got out to California. I remember like almost like coming out of a dream. We were in a black SUV with two guys in dress blues and sitting in the front and pulling up to the hotel we had just been at 4 months before for his wedding. And they had a big banner with his picture, and it said "Our American Hero" on it.
Yeah.
And that took me out of that blackout. So that was my first, and and I got to tell you this. I hope this is okay to go into this because I want to share. We were talking
Please.
about my relationship with Danny, and my whole attitude. I want you to know regarding the military. And this is not something I'm proud of. It was not good in the beginning. Growing up with my dad became a violent, raging, and dangerous man by the time I was born. So I did not trust the military, even though I went through a time where I had to, when Danny first told me.
Fine.
Yeah.
I don't trust. Sometimes I don't trust them. Don't worry about it. Go ahead. Yeah, you're fine.
This is with the hero's journey, with our our workshops, what we call them, the generosity of scars, our warrior workshops, and
beautiful.
This is one of my scars. It's not a proud moment that when Danny told me what he wanted to do, I did not want to support him. I absolutely was not going to. Until right before he was sworn in, it was the summer after his freshman year of college, and he was notified that he had been was part of a group of exceptional recruits that was invited to be sworn in by a general at the Chicago Air and Water Show in front of dignitaries, like this special event.
Wow.
And that was for him. It was such a big deal. And he wanted me there. And what I finally said to him, I had just like, he was waiting for me to say I'd come. This was the weekend before. And I took this moment and in my heart, just cried out to God for asking for the magic words to change his mind. That was it. I gotta have those words now, God. Got it. We're running out of time here. And then I said to him, this is so hard because I love you so much and I'm afraid. Yeah. And the moment I said those words, I thought about fear and love. It's like, it made me think about what I had taught him and his brothers about love and fear. And it was like, those magic words didn't change his mind. They changed my heart. Because I said to him, obviously my love for you is greater than any fear. So I will be at that ceremony. So, and then that first ceremony my husband and I went to, we were in awe. You talked about awe earlier, we were like blown away by the honor, noble, character of this ceremony. And afterwards, the first thing I could tell Danny was that I was humbled by it. It was humbling. And then we went from that to, basic training at Lackland Air Force Base. And that kid, you guys know this better than I about basic. They don't have their phones. It was all letters. And the day of graduation, we ran to the big stadium, and afterwards,
Lackland Air Force Base.
Yeah, and we could not find him. And so, and he did the same thing in basic that he did, I told you about in EOD. I don't think I'm going to make it, I'm not going to I don't know, this is so hard, blah, blah, blah. And so we couldn't find him. So I'm like, the poor kid didn't make it. And we ran all over that base. We had his high school friends with us, and we split up we had our cell phones, and we were, back and forth. Anyway, like 15 minutes before 8:00, when they had to be back at their barracks or whatever, I'm in one of the stores and I see him. And he's in his uniform. So I'm thinking, and I ran to him and we're hugging. And I'm like, why? We couldn't find him. He goes, because I was in a different ceremony. I'm like, what do you mean? And he was in the indoor special ceremony because he was in the top 10%.
Wow, he's a distinguished graduate. He was a distinguished graduate. Your son was a distinguished graduate. I mean, that's...
And so humble.
I know. He's like, well, I was just in a different location and I couldn't tell you.
I would have bragged.
Didn't have my phone and they wouldn't let me, And I pictured, he said he was standing by the doorway hoping to see us walk, because we had to walk by that building. And later I saw it and I realized we did. And I picture him like he was when he was 10 at, like, say, a Christmas pageant, looking out, waiting for mom and dad to walk by.
Yeah.
But of course, that's my memory of that. But, so yeah, the whole, we just went from one event, obviously, and then the EOD graduation where that took my breath away with honors, what he had learned and what he would talk about, taking me around and showing me all these things about bombs that were made in Germany and Poland and how they learned how they make bombs and all these other, I'm like, it just blew my mind. And,
it sounds like such a beautiful moment of understanding, though, because the thing I've heard about parenting, and I'm not lucky enough to have my own, but the thing I've heard is it's the first time in your life that there's something that's bigger than yourself. Oh. And then, and I've heard it's like your heart is living outside your body. And as a parent, I can understand the fear. And then you walk into that ceremony and you see that your son is experiencing the same thing. He has found something to him that's bigger than himself. And so I imagine, or at least the way that I feel, is that I'm grateful that you had that moment of understanding, because I imagine that it really helped him to feel connected to you in that moment. Like you guys could understand each other suddenly in a different way than you had before.
And yeah, it's my my theme, the greatest moment so far in my life, I would say, is learning how experiencing to the extreme how powerful love is over fear. And even now I can say over death, I mean, the worst that could possibly happen, And it
Yeah.
wasn't what I was fearful of, because I wouldn't go there. I was just fearful that he would have post-traumatic stress. He would have nightmares. I was just
Yeah.
fearful of that. But
Right.
I had to go through the worst thing that could happen, and discovered that, through storytelling and my work in helping others find their voice and tell their stories, the resolution I have found is that, I look back, and I think, had I not, trusted love, had I stood firm, nope, not going to support you, which people do choose, you can choose that, I would have missed that humbling ceremony. He still would
Yeah.
have gone. It's not like he wasn't going. He was 19. He didn't need, by then, or he was 18, but he
Right.
turned 19. By Lackland, he was 19. I would have missed that. And then, at that ceremony, at the end of it, well, we missed the ceremony, but we did see the parade the next day. And my
Of
husband
course.
leaned in and he said, "He left home a boy. Look at that confident man." And that just
Yes.
blew, I still get the chills when I remember that. That would be a memory I wouldn't carry,
Sure.
and then that the awe-inspiring graduation at Eglin, and then he still would have been deployed. He still would have gone to Afghanistan, and he still would have been killed.
Yeah.
And 7,000 miles from home, dusty road, away from home. And the only difference there, because I wasn't there. The only difference is he would have died never having heard me tell him how humbled and proud I had become of the man he had become. So I will never regret. I'm so grateful that I did that, and it proved to me and showed me, the power of love, and it is just not that I didn't, as a parent, love is powerful, but boy, I felt like, and you asked about those early days, the
Oh, yeah.
test was tough. And somebody recently told me, a combat veteran said that, there's that term, the fog of war.
Yes.
And that's what I felt like my whole first year was a
I bet.
fog.
I
And
bet.
yeah, and I don't remember a lot. I don't,
Yeah.
but what I have three, and I share this with in people sometimes, that three crystal clear memories. The first one is that they did tell us right away, that for some reason they wanted us to know that his face was not touched, which I thought, okay, whatever. I mean, I was so upset.
Sure.
I still remember that so clearly. Like, so what? He's gone. What? Why? And then and this is like one of my scars. I was saying my lack of trust in the military. My dad, when he never said, he was that generation, never said a word about anything, but
Yeah.
he drank and drank and drank. And
Yes.
when he finally got sober, it was sadly too late. He had destroyed his body. He lived 2 years in sobriety. But right before he died, he shared one combat story with me. And I'm the only one, because I'm the baby, and I was the only
Yeah.
one who was willing to sit and listen to him and hang out with him. At that point, he had burned so many bridges with my older brother and sister, and so I heard this one combat story, and I'll tell you, I will never forget it. I have never spoken it. It was
Yeah.
that bad that me, big talker, big mouth, always telling stories. I have never been able to tell that story out loud. And I don't think I ever will. And Scott, who I work with, says, "Oh, maybe you should someday." And I'm like, I don't think so. It was my dad's story.
Sometimes, if you don't mind, I think that sometimes you have to be in the right place to tell that story.
Yeah. I don't.
But one of the things that I think that you're doing, ma'am, if I may, is that when we talk about World War II and that the greatest generation and 100%, and people have this misconception, right? They're like, they were so stoic, they just came home and they never talked about it. And I want to follow up, and I want to say, now I want you to go and look at their lives and what that cost those men to keep that grief and anger and rage deep inside of them, and they were never able to talk about it. No. That's not what we want.
Right.
We
They lost their
want,
lives.
We want them. We want our warriors, those affected by war, to come home and share their stories with us, because we have an obligation as a society
Right.
to be engaged in it and to understand what's going on, what is being fought in our names, and making it like
Exactly.
it should not be this PG-13 movie that everybody, you have to understand it, and that veteran needs to come home and be able to share that story with you. And I just want to say, we talk about, the journey, the hero's journey, the Gold Star ambassador. I just find it awe-inspiring. Again, I'll say it again, of what you're doing. You're taking this grief, this unbelievable tragedy, and you are helping others who come home and be like, no, that grief, that grief is okay. I spent a month, in a mental hospital for my grief and my rage and all that stuff, and that's what I learned. It took me going there to finally be like, oh my God, all the things that I've been through, and I didn't realize it, and I needed to tell people about it. So I just want to say that it's amazing what you're doing, man, and
Oh,
thank you for it.
thank you. I do feel that it's my highest calling.
Yeah,
And one of my favorite quotes, I can't find where it came from. I read it and I'm sticking with it.
yeah,
Is that oftentimes God uses our deepest pain to launch us on our greatest calling. And that's really what's happened for me. And everything you said is 100% what we like to promote, that our warriors need to come home. We owe them
yes,
listening and taking it in. And I think back on my dad. He needed that. I needed it. Of course, I didn't know. I was only 21. It just, all it did was, at that moment, I was like, what it did was answered all the whys I had cried myself to sleep with as a child. And and the wound I had from that, I turned my back on the military, and I swear I would have nothing ever again, ever, for my whole life, to do with it until my 18-year-old son came home and said, I'm going to enlist.
right,
And, but what happened as this whole those memories, that first one while his face wasn't touched, and I'm like, I remember thinking, I don't trust this military. I knew not to trust them. They hurt my dad. Why should I believe, if after what happened to my dad, why should I believe that they're telling me the truth? They probably tell every mom whatever they think the mom wants to hear,
yeah,
especially because for me, I felt, because his casket was closed. So I'm
right,
like, how dare you tell me his face wasn't touched and I never get to see that beautiful face again? Nah, I'm not believing you. So that's the first one. And then the next memory was walking out of Vandenberg Chapel after his military service there, and his commanding officer's wife came up to
mm-hmm.
me, and she said, "I have a message for you from the medevacs. They wanted Danny's mom to know that when they loaded him up on the transport, they told him, 'You're going home, son.'" And he said right away, "I know." Well, first of all, they wanted me to know. Let me back up. I'm sorry. They wanted
No,
me to know
please,
that he was so lucid and so calm and never lost consciousness until he died. And again, I'm like, yeah, tell me whatever you want, right? But then they said he was actually telling his teammates what to do to save his body, because he had been when college, his first year of college, he took EMT. He was an EMT, and he was going all the way back to that, trying to tell them how to save his life. And that's how lucid he was and calm. So I'm still like not believing him. And then this wife, this commanding officer's wife, says, they said, "You're going home, son." And he said, "I know, but please tell my mom I didn't break my face." That was the message. And
mm.
at that moment, that was my turning point with the military. And like now my whole life
Yeah,
is serving the
yeah,
military, and it was at that moment I thought, they're not lying, because
right,
that's a private joke with
Yes.
Danny and me, and the rest of the family knew, but it was really between Danny and I, and they couldn't make that up. I mean,
Sure.
I didn't break my face. Where would, it's not a common thing. And then they said that was the last thing he said. And within, I don't know how many minutes, he took his last breath and he was gone. And a couple things that tell me, well, that joke goes back to the summer before he turned 5. We took his training wheels off his bike, and we lived at the top of a hill, and his 2 older brothers would race down that hill. And of course, he was ready to race down the hill. And I said, no, 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 you don't have the balance yet. I said, you stay up here with me and your little brother. And I turned around to check on the little one and the big wheel. And that split second, he headed down that wheel and the wobbling all the way down, wiped out at the bottom. And I sat in those bloody rocks for what felt like hours, holding this little boy, and half his face was road rash.
Mm.
And he cried for so long. And when he finally got to that point, and he goes,
Yeah.
I'm not even 5, and I already broke my face.
Oh.
And by then neighbors had gathered, and everybody, the family, everybody was there watching me hold this little boy in the street, and we just all cracked up. At first we were so worried, oh, he's going to be scarred for life, and he's probably paralyzed, and but then he said that, and we just cracked up. And for the rest of his short life, that before any overnight camping trips as a kid, or overnight sporting events, or college deployments, I'd say, don't break your face. And that was the last thing he said. And it tells me they didn't lie, because they couldn't make that up. They didn't lie that he was peaceful, that he was lucid, because he didn't even lose his sense of humor. He knew he was dying, or he wouldn't
Yeah.
have said, tell my mom. He
Yeah.
knew that home wasn't with me. It was permanent, So that was my second. And then my third memory is just that I realized how the first things I said that I can remember, I'm sure I said a lot more, but the ones I remember after that was just that I was grateful, so grateful that I chose to trust, love over, and support him. And so, yeah, that's.
Yeah, that is so. I have like maybe one more question, ma'am, and then we'll probably wrap it up. I just thank you for sharing all this. Just a beautiful story of love, of what grief is, and what you learn through going through these type of events. Um, my question is, you've probably gained another family. Is my guess. You've gained a family of those brothers and sisters to the left and right of him, who
Right.
now probably consider you a member of their family. Because that's the way I look at this week, on the anniversary of my airman's death, I
Yeah.
talked to his father on the phone, you know? And I shared for a couple of minutes how much I loved Yelner and how much I was in awe of him.
Yeah.
And, I just want to ask, if you could talk a little bit about the family maybe you've gained through this whole tragedy and what that's meant to you.
Wow, boy. I mean, even you. Really, you are like another connection of the family to me,
Yeah,
and of course the guys who served with him, some of them, it took them a long time
sure.
to reach out to me,
Yes.
years and years.
Years.
But
Years.
when they were ready, and they did, I was ready, and
Yep.
just it's been such an amazing journey with that. One of the guys, I mentioned they were attached to Allied. They were actually attached to the Canadian. I don't know if I mentioned that, but the
Oh, wow.
Canadian.
Okay. Yeah.
And he made really good friends. He was like, "Well, I was born almost in Canada," because we were right below Quetico Provincial. So
Yeah.
he felt like he was, Canadian with them. And a couple of them were going to come and visit and meet his brothers. And one in particular, I remember him telling us about this Tim Nightingale. He told us his name and everything. And that it took Tim 7 years to call me. But finally, after 7 years, he did. And interestingly, the day he called was Veterans Day. That to him it was Remembrance. They call it Remembrance Day in Canada.
Yeah.
And I was reading the biography of John McCrae,
Yeah.
the Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, who was a an Army surgeon, Canadian Army surgeon, and poet who wrote In Flanders Fields.
Field, yes.
And I was reading his biography, and I had just, before the phone rang, I had just read this line that said he came from a place called Guelph, Ontario. And then I took this call, and it's Tim Nightingale from Canada. And we, caught up, and, he explained to me why he waited. It was just a very dark time. And I said, well, we still want to meet you if you want to join us. Our family gets together in northern Minnesota. And so anyway, we made all these plans. And then before we hung up, I said, so where in Canada do you live? I'm picturing this vast, whatever country. And he goes, oh, I'm from a place. And he even used the words, I'm not making this up. He said, I'm from a place called Guelph, Ontario. And I'm like,
Wow.
what are
Perfect.
the crazy odds? I'd never even heard of that before. And then I said, have you heard of it? And of course he goes, yeah, we've got a statue in our town.
Wow.
But I just need to I'll make this as quick, cut it as
No,
short as
please.
I can. But this is really, when you asked about family, this kid, he was, at the time, he was in his 30s, which, to a 23-year-old, that's older, I mean,
Yes.
so he's older now, quite a bit, he's not like a kid, but I still consider him that. But, so anyway, I hung up from him, and for whatever crazy reason, my brain went to this cup I had that Danny gave me when he was 16. He spent that summer in Europe with a drama group traveling to different countries, and he brought home all sorts of stuff. And he brought me this cup from Scotland that was really pretty and became very precious and priceless to me after he was killed. And in that very year, or that just a month before that call, I dropped it and I broke it in half, and I was so sick about it. And I had it sitting on my nightstand in pieces, planning to glue it back together. And for whatever reason, it'll make sense when I get to this point. But I thought of that cup when I hung up from Tim, and I ran up to my nightstand and I looked at it. Now I'd had the cup since 2003. It's now 2017. And I'd been looking at it for all those years and not seeing that the red flowers are poppies. They're
Yes.
poppies on that
Yes.
cup.
Yes.
And I just like all of a sudden, and you talked about the grief, the
Yes.
time frame, those early days. This is 7 years later. And it came to me it all came back, like here I had this broken cup and everything kind of gelled into reality. I said, I took it to my husband and I showed him, I said, these are poppies. Did you see these are poppies? And we both were like, and this is going to sound weird, but we both came to this realization that Danny was always going to die on a battlefield. He was, and he was destined. And we weren't even talking about military when he bought me that cup. And he was 16. He wouldn't have had a clue about what poppies represent because we didn't talk about it. And so that brought that to me. And then because of that, and this is how cruel this journey has been. And again, walking with grief, letting it speak to our hearts, letting it speak to our souls. I came to that, and I could tell you, it was that day, Veterans Day of 2017, that I could say, and have said ever since, though the pain will never go away, my heart is always broken.
Yes. I
I can now say it as well with my soul.
Yeah.
It goes so much deeper than my mother's heart. It's my soul, and so fast forward, Tim gets together meets all his brothers and sisters and all the grandkids, and now we get together. He joins us for every of our family gatherings. But that first year, 2018, now it had been 8 years for him, for all of us, since Danny had been killed. And we sat up late that night, just the brothers and Tim and me. Everyone else was in bed, and we were talking about funny stories and all the kids growing up, whatever. As the night wore on, it got more solemn, and finally Tim opened up, and he said, and I already knew this because he had told me on the phone call, but my boys didn't know yet. He said, I want you to know that I was the combat engineer that missed that IED that took Dan. And I was shocked that he, said that. And then he said, he had been in the mental hospital, as you put
Yep.
it, many times. He had become addicted to heroin and
Yeah.
alcohol and
Yeah.
attempted suicide and all of
Yeah.
that. But he, at that point, 8 years down the road, he said, I am no longer experiencing the hyper startle, the nightmares,
Yeah.
the
Good.
flashbacks. I'm not
Yes.
using, I don't want to die.
Yes.
But there are times now. My boys were still digesting that he had just made this confession that, which took a lot of courage for him.
Absolutely.
And so he said, but there are times, and tonight's one of them, where I do ask myself if the wrong man came home.
Yeah.
And it
For
was
sure.
total silence. My boys were taking it all in, and he had his head down. And I just said, oh my goodness, didn't I tell you about that cup?
Yeah.
I said, Tim, that was Danny's destiny. That
Yes.
was his destiny. Your destiny was to come home. So welcome home and be,
God
you're
bless you.
part of a family. And now we just need to find out what you're supposed to do. And
It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful
I
story.
imagine that, yeah, that offered more healing to him than he found anywhere else.
well,
Yes.
he
And it was
said that.
right.
He said,
Yes.
for 7, 8 years, friends, families, professionals told him, this is survivor's guilt, it's lies, it's
Yes.
not true, blah, blah, blah.
It's a
He said,
shame that you
nobody
carry. It's a
but Dan,
shame that you carry. And
but it's,
so, go ahead, ma'am.
I was just going to say, but he said, but nobody but Danny's mom could take that from him.
Yeah. And I want to end this show, if you don't mind, Kate. I'm just going to kind of wrap it up here a little bit. I want to first thank you for coming on. Your story is inspiring. Thank you for loaning your son to us and for him to serve to protect us. His story is one of heroism, and he was a great young man. And thank you for sharing his memory with us. I'm in awe of his story, and I'm so grateful that you are able to help our veterans heal by blazing a path on how to share grief. It's so important. And I just want to tell all my brothers and sisters that are downrange that, we're praying for you. We're praying for your safety. And for those of us who are home and who have lost people, at some point in time, I encourage all of you, when you're ready, to reach out to their parents. I have done it. It is one of the best things that you can do when you are there mentally, to reach out to the parents, because all they want, when I approach, I don't know what to say, and they say, I just want to share that memory with you. And I just want to thank you, ma'am, for sharing his memory with us. And may his memory be a blessing to you and your family.
I'll say too, Holly, Danny sounded funny and thoughtful and brave, and it has been a gift to get to listen to you talk about him for an hour and to feel like his memory at the very least is still with us. Thank you for sharing.
Yep.
I have also felt like a lot of strength in your vulnerability, and I'm really hoping that other people who have had similar experiences can see what the grieving process can look like and how it can add support at a time when people might need it. So thank you so much for just sharing with us. It's been an absolute honor to just listen to you talk. It really has been.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
You don't know how much this gives to me, and and I feel so connected with you. Again, that family stuff,
Yes.
and knowing, as you mentioned, the sacrifices that you make. I mean, we talk about sacrifice like people hear me say it and think we're talking about my son's life. Well, but there are sacrifices in the very beginning, like you talked about, like you guys don't want to tell your family things that you want to
Yeah.
protect them from. That's a sacrifice. Not getting to be with your dad when he was dying,
Yeah.
huge sacrifice. I mean, the sacrifices that our military make, I consider our veterans and active duty, of course, but I consider you guys the highest priority of the citizens in this country. We would not have this country without our military, and our country needs to figure that out as
Well, thank
quickly
you
as
so
possible.
Thank you so much, and I think we all echo those comments. And we were just going to say thank you for coming on again, and we look forward to. I look forward to seeing you in Topeka soon. I'm going to sign up for that
Yeah.
Heroes Journey conference. I will be
Yes.
there. I'm going to be there. Don't you worry about it. I'll see you in June. It's only up down the road. And I just want to say goodbye to all of our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, goodbye.
Love you.
Love you.
You've been home for a couple of years now, buddy, but you're still fighting the war.